Good evening, this is Katie Gilmer with the FAA Safety Team, and welcome to National Drone Safety Awareness Week. Tonight is the last night of our 5 days of webinars, and we are happy to have you. Tonight we're going to be talking about drones and education. We have a special guest with us tonight, Chris Lee from District 196 Fabrication Lab STEM program at Apple Valley High School. So I'll introduce him in just a minute. The way we've been running these webinars, we have a few slides up front just talking about the FAA Safety Team, and then Chris's group has put together a short video that we'll watch, and the one today is actually quite a bit shorter than the other ones, which will give us a lot of time to talk about education and questions at the end, which will be a lot of fun. So, and at that point, I'll turn it over to Chris, who is with us tonight, and he will answer your questions directly. So with that, we will get started here. As I mentioned, it is Drone Safety Awareness Week. This is a national week through the FAA. This is the first ever Drone Safety Awareness Week, and the goal is to highlight the different key sectors of the drone community. So we talked about law enforcement on Monday, photography on Tuesday, agriculture on Wednesday, DNR talked with us on Thursday, and then tonight is the STEM program. We are going to highlight a few safety initiatives at the end, and then give you some ideas for connecting with folks in your area. So I'm going to switch over to the video at this point, and you can listen to a little bit about what District 196 has to say.
We have a class at Apple Valley High School that features drones and teaches us how to make them, how to fly them, and even race them. Here's Oscar with the scoop.
Hey Eagles, it's Oscar flying into the story. I just found out about this class recently. It's so awesome. I wonder what we can do in it.
So when you first get your drone in the class, you can add different things to it. Like you can change the motors and the propellers on it so that it can go quicker. And you can change the camera on it so that you can see things differently.
Right now, we are partnered with Pop Drones. They're one of our STEM partners in our STEM program, and they helped write a lot of the curriculum for the class. So what we focused on is kind of the fun part about drones, and that's racing them. And when you race drones, you have to do a significant amount of modification to the drone. So we can add different motors, we can add different flight chassis. There's a company that actually puts on races, and they're called Hydra FPV. And they're gonna put on a race here at Apple Valley High School between Apple Valley and St. Louis Park High School. That's the first ever high school drone race, probably in Minnesota and maybe in the country.
If you look up and see a drone, it might be one of ours. Reporting for Eagle Eye, I am Oscar Nieto.
Pretty cool. So that was Apple Valley High School and their drone program that they have set up. So we're going to talk about, oops, let me switch over here. We're going to talk about just a few quick safety message, and then we will come back to Chris on the line and talk a bit about his program. So if you want to be a drone pilot, if you're flying commercially, you have to get a 107 certificate. You also have to register your aircraft and then follow some rules. And those are the only 3 things you need to be a drone pilot. The rules are pretty straightforward. Stay below 400 feet. Your drone has to be less than 55 pounds, and that includes your payload. Stay within visual line of sight of your drone. So if you're flying off in the distance, you always have to maintain visual line of sight, and that is to make sure you avoid other manned aircraft or other drones or obstacles. Do not fly over people. And then there are some weather requirements. You have to have 3 miles of visibility and also approval to fly in controlled airspace, and special requirements for night that include waivers and a FAA authorization. When we talk about controlled airspace, this is the airspace around busy airports. So if you're here in Minnesota, that would be Minneapolis Airport, St. Paul Airport, Flying Cloud, Anoka, and a few others in the area. And the FAA requires that you have access to enter those airspaces just like a manned aircraft would. So that is done through this application called Lance. And Lance is actually an app for your phone. You can access them through web services as well online. And the back end of it is run by the FAA, and it includes all of the controlled airspaces, plus these things called TFRs. These are temporary flight restrictions. And controlled airspace is constant. So there's always controlled airspace around MSP, but TFRs come and go. So if there's a fire, a flight restriction will come up, and that tells all aircraft, both manned and unmanned, that they are not allowed to fly in that area. They also post TFRs when the president or vice president travels, or when there are large special events like football games, baseball games, etc. So it's important, especially with the 2020 elections coming up, to always check the airspace via your Lance app and make sure that there's not a TFR. In places where you don't normally see TFRs, they will be popping up a lot more because of this travel that's coming up. So just a quick map for you here. This is a snapshot of Minneapolis and surrounding areas. So all of these yellow circles have an airport at the center of them. So there's a saying in aviation, big sky, little plane, I'll never hit anybody, I won't see anybody, but it does happen. And so we want everybody to be aware that there are a lot of aircraft in the area, even if you're not used to seeing them. There are almost 400 places where aircraft can land in Minnesota, so they're pretty much everywhere. The blue hashed areas are the controlled airspaces here in the Minneapolis area. And just a note, the red line coming through the Minneapolis-St. Paul is the Mississippi River, and that is considered a national park, so it is also off, not allowed for drones. In addition to the FAA requirements here in Minnesota, there are some extra state statutes. These date back to the early 1900s and were originally made for manned aircraft, and they apply to commercial operations with drones. So your aircraft has to be registered with the FAA, but it also has to be registered with the state. Aircraft need to be insured, and you have to have a commercial operations license from Minnesota Department of Transportation. And then additionally, you still must comply with all FAA rules. In addition to the federal and the state regulations, there are also local ordinances that must be followed. These are sometimes difficult to find. MnDOT does keep a repository of these local ordinances when we come across them, and you can find them there at that MnDOT /arrow link, and the local UAS regulations are in the bottom right of your screen when you go there. Those are the pilot's responsibility, but we do try to post as many that we can find. We highly encourage pilots to find resources. There are a lot of local flying clubs, from your traditional hobby groups like AMA to new FPV groups for the racers. There are groups for commercial operators. If you're on Facebook, there's a lot of groups on Facebook flying drones. We highly encourage you to reach out, find some friends, and fly together. The FAA does also have information about where to fly and other policies and things. You know, the rules have been changing a bit with drones. So faa.gov/UAS is the place you can find all the latest information. FAAsafety.gov is where this webinar is hosted. We are a group of volunteers that do outreach for the FAA, and we have fairly regular webinars and seminars for drones here in Minnesota and across the United States. So if you're not in part of the WINGS program through FAAsafety.gov, I highly recommend that you sign up and get credit for all of these events that you attend. And again, there's the MnDOT Aeronautics link as well. UAS inquiries for the FAA, our local FSDO, that's a local FAA office here at MSP. You can contact them anytime. That's their phone number and their email address, and they have all the latest and greatest with respect to UAS information. There's also the UAS helpline and the UAS email. Those are addresses to the people out in DC, and they do respond. So if you need help from big FAA, they will get back to you if you use those addresses. The hotline complaint, you can email tips and questions and complaints to that FAA link as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris. And Chris, I'm going to unmute you. Let me find you here. Okay, you should be available to speak. So if you'd like to give us an overview of your program, kind of where you started and where you've gone, and then folks, if you have questions, feel free to post them into the questions line, and I will let Chris know when they pop up.
Hello, welcome. My name's Chris Lee. I'm a fabrication lab coordinator at Apple Valley High School, and I also teach Fab Lab courses out of our lab. I'm a longtime physics teacher, and we won a Department of Labor grant in 2015 that was connected with Youth Career Connect. And that grant allowed us to have what's called an E3 STEM program, which is to educate, explore, and employ students in STEM-related fields, get them career counseling from sophomore year through freshman year in college. And we were partnered with Inver Hills Community College and Dakota County Technical College for that. But part of what my job was to do was to help integrate STEM throughout our whole school curriculum. And then, so we're not just studying STEM as a individual unit, but it's integrated through all the different courses we teach in our school and all the different subjects. And because of that, I was able to create some courses that had students learning how to use the equipment in the lab. We have an introductory course called Fab Lab Essentials, and then an advanced Fab Lab class. And those are the first two classes that we started. And then I started doing research on how we could more effectively use the Fab Lab. And one of the things that I really enjoyed in teaching physics was aeronautics and aerodynamics. So I thought, especially with where drones were kind of coming in along at that time, that it would be a good fit for our fabrication lab. So I did about a year and a half of research on drones, and part of our STEM program was that we were developing business partners with our high school and our STEM pathway in our school district. And one of the business partners was Pop Drones, and they helped actually do a lot, with the curriculum that I developed for the course. Initially, I had looked at having students build big drones, over the ones where they'd have to get to the Part 107 certification to fly. And as I looked into that more nationally, there weren't a whole lot of places doing that, and it was pretty expensive to do. So we luckily I met with Katie, and she was teaching some community ed classes with the tiny whoop drones, which are the drones that they weigh about an ounce. So we didn't really have to worry about a lot of the regulations because you fly them indoors. And so what I found when I started the class was the kids were just completely enamored by the whole subject of drones. And I had two classes of 18 kids each. It started in March, and when I was doing some of the research and buying some of the equipment for it in January, I ran into a guy that had started up a drone racing company, and that was in January or February, I think. And we kind of connected and were able to kind of set up a race in the end of May between our school, Apple Valley High School, and St. Louis Park High School, which had been doing drones in an engineering course. My class met 5 days a week for 48 minutes a day, and we focused on building drones and then modifying them and looking at different motors and props and flight chassis. We could build all that stuff in our Fab Lab because of the machines that we had. And we also were able to, the kids were able to solder and do a lot of stuff that they had never done before. When the class started in March, I think I had of the two classes, all the kids, only two had ever soldered before. So the learning curve was extremely high at the start. What I really liked about it was the kids' enthusiasm. I would come in to school. I usually get to school about 6:30. The class day starts at 7:30, and our class met 7th hour. We have a 7-period day, and they would meet at the end of the class day, and I'd have kids show up waiting for me to open the lab up in the morning, and then they would stay until I told them to go home because I had to go home as well. So I was seeing students interested in a way that I'd never seen in the 30 years that I've taught physics. So the engagement was really high. They didn't see it as learning, they saw it as just having fun. What I really liked about the drones is they would fail fast. So they'd fly, fail, crash, and then they'd have to do all kinds of engineering to get their drones flying again. So that was really neat to see. And the focus on racing, that I think was a real big motivator. It really kind of forced the students to learn how to fly well and fly through a course. The way I kind of, I've had people ask, well, what kind of curriculum did you have? And what I focused on was actually from the Part 107 coursework, where you have to, as a commercial drone pilot, you have to keep a log of everything you do to your drone. And so in the advanced drone or advanced Fab Lab class, I teach the kids keep an engineering book. So we kept a drone book that they'd have to record everything that they did, which was a real good way for them to focus their thoughts and to kind of see what they had done from day to day. So that was a real good part to it. When I did my research to see what other schools were doing nationally, there really wasn't a lot that I had found. There were some canned courses that really focused on just passing the Part 107. There was really not a whole lot that focused on the construction and modification of drones, which is what my course wanted to do because of the facilities that I had in the Fab Lab. So that's kind of was what the focus was. So the curriculum kind of was designed around that and looking at like battery types. A lot of kids had never done anything with batteries. They'd never worked with electric motors. There's all kinds of electronics that they had to do too. And then coding. So it was really a full integration of the Fab Lab. I teach all of those different parts when I teach my intro and my advanced class. And what's really neat about the drone class is that it kind of pulls all that together. So I had kids that were using all the machines in our lab through the drone class, which is kind of neat to see. And so what our plan is we want to add an advanced drone class. The drones that we flew in the first class were brush drones, so they're a little bit easier to fly and not quite as fast. And the plan is to kind of get into brushless drones in the next course that we design, and they're a little bit bigger. They're still under the half-pound limit, so and they're basically flying indoors, which is I think it's a little more safe than flying the bigger drones. And still, when they crash those small drones, the cost to repair them is pretty minimal. That was one of the things that Katie and I had talked about when we were looking at curriculum for the class, was the bigger drones. They just are so expensive that it's too scary to fly them because you don't have the money to repair them if they crash. And the kids would probably crash those just as much as they'd crash the little drones. So that's kind of been where it's at. We actually formed a drone club this fall, and we were partnered with one of our middle schools that feeds into us. So we have about 30 students now that are flying drones twice a week through our drone club, and about half of them are 7th and 8th graders, and the other half are high school students. So it's really kind of exploded on me. I'm probably spending as much time with drones as I am teaching my other classes, so which is kind of fun. The enthusiasm is so high. So if you have questions, I can talk more. You know, I'm a high school science teacher, so I can talk for a long time if I need to.
That's awesome. Thanks, Chris. We'll wait and see if people are typing in questions now. So how many students do you have this time around?
It's about the same. I think what's happened, we had another race in October, and we're going to do another one in November. That club, or the company that's putting on the drone races, is trying to get high schools to form teams, and they've got, I think, about 6 to 8 teams now, with another probably 10 or 12 that are interested. And so the two classes that I'm going to teach in the spring trimester again, which starts in March, I've got about the same number of students, but I'm getting more that are interested because they're seeing when the drone club is flying, they fly out in our commons area. And so kids are starting to get kind of interested in it, and we have more room for more students. So I would think we're probably going to have 20 to 25 per class by the end of by the time March rolls around.
That's pretty awesome. So a lot of the attendees today are drone pilots themselves, you know, kind of back in my shoes. What would you recommend that they do to, if they want to reach out to schools in the area without being creepy? You know, how do they volunteer their time or resources?
Definitely. I think so. One of the neatest things that we had through our STEM program with the Department of Labor was the connections that we made with businesses. And what I saw coming from the education side is I was probably just as surprised as the businesses were how willing they wanted to work with us and how willing we wanted to work with them. And so I think, you know, what you probably want to do is contact the administrations in the schools and then see if there are any teachers that are interested in starting that up. We had, when we put on our race, it was a practice race in October of this fall. We had about 5 or 6 different groups from different high schools and middle schools watching the race, and some of the schools had kids that were interested in it because they had heard about it through social media, but they didn't have adults, you know, teachers or adults that were willing or had said they'd help them yet. So I think pilots that are flying now, the best thing you can do is to just contact the schools in your area, because I know there are going to be kids that are going to, there are kids that have drones and are flying them, and most of the time they're flying line of sight, and they're flying drones that they, you know, purchase from retail stores. So they're usually not as I don't know, well made as like the ones that we're flying. So yeah, I would definitely contact the schools and tell them that you're interested in connecting with teachers that have that have kids that are in science classes or in engineering classes for sure. But my goal is to get more girls involved. It's when you start technology type courses, like even when I started teaching physics, we had a lot more boys than girls taking physics, but after a few years we were able to get the enrollment to be 50-50, and so that's kind of my goal right now. So I've been doing a lot of outreach to girls in our high school and our middle school, and then kind of our long-term goal is to get the elementary school kids involved, because by doing that, you're hitting especially girls before they lose their interest in science and math and stuff. What our district has done is they've kind of focused on math and science, and our enrollment for girls in math and science is about the same as boys, which is great. And so now what I want to do with drones is do the same thing. So, and having people from outside the school, outside education, to come in and help do that would be huge. So, for example, we had there was a group there. Let's see, I can't think of the name of it. Tri-Valley. It was a radio control group that was flying, and they had lost their space to fly because the University of Minnesota sold the land that they were flying on. And so they heard about our drone race and came and watched our race, and they actually are getting involved with our club, and they're going to be coming in and helping with our kids and flying both at the middle school and the high school. So that's certainly a thing that drone pilots can do, is, helping get teachers involved and get with kids that are interested in it, and then volunteering to help with that. So right now, what my club is doing, in St. Thomas Academy has a drone club, and then St. Louis Park does too, is we're providing the space. The kids are actually running the club, and they're doing all the organization stuff. I help them with figuring out financing and stuff like that. But we've had some of our STEM partners have donated money just for our drone club, which has been pretty cool to see. So yeah, that's, getting as much involvement with the schools and approaching the administration and saying, hey, if you have teachers that are interested in starting this, or the students too, that's probably the best route to go.
Great, thank you. We have a 3D printer specific question. Do you happen to know so they in the past they were like $1,000 or more? Has the consumer market, is it better? Have they come down in price? Are there a lot of options these days?
Yeah, you can build your own 3D printers from kits for like $200 or $300. The ones that I have in our lab we have a lot of MakerBots. They're 5th generation and replicator pluses, which are they've worked out a lot of the bugs, so they're pretty stable now. If you think about where inkjet printers were in the 90s, that's kind of where we are with 3D printers now. I think we've gotten over the hump with some of the technology glitches in them. But you can certainly find lower cost ones. I think the MakerBots, that the 5th gen ones are about $1,500 now, and then the replicator pluses are probably $2,500. So the price is coming down. You can certainly make them yourself, and there's all kinds of information online on how to do that. You can buy the hardware kits, and then the biggest part, all the technologies in the extruder, the controls to run the X, Y, and Z axes are pretty standard. That's probably, if I were to look at the difficulty of building a 3D printer, would be in the extruder, and that's kind of been done. There's a lot of open source stuff now, so if I were gonna start a fabrication lab with a limited amount of money, that's certainly what I would do, is I would look at building them.
Interesting. I didn't know that was an option.
Oh yeah.
Cool. Great. I guess any recommendations for getting kids involved in drones in general? Things that you see that have worked to pull people in?
Yeah, I think once they started seeing drones fly, we actually, so the first couple days of my class, I had invited the Minnesota Drone, Mighty Drones is the Minnesota chapter for drone racing. And I think almost every state has a chapter like that. And so their president came out and talked to my class, and they brought some of their drones and flew them. And then because we had just finished a remodel of the front half of our school, I told them that our school would be a great place for them to come and fly and race. So after they got done talking to my classes, we went out and flew in the library area where some other classes were going on, and the kids that were in the library were just kind of in awe. So I think just getting the drones out and flying around, you kind of gather a crowd because it's kind of unique, especially the small ones. And then because they're FPV, first person view, we had some monitors that were in on the same channels that they were flying, and then kids could watch as the pilots flew so they could see what they were flying. So that was a really good way to get interest. And then I think what's happening now is there's been probably in 2015, 2016, drone racing was so new, so there was just this new thing out there for racing, and then they thought it kind of peaked, but it's actually coming back up again. There's there's a drone racing league that they have races all across the country. One of the best pilots in the U.S. is in Minnesota, which is kind of cool. We have a couple other ones that are ranked in the top 150 that are going down to race in the national finals in, I think it's the second week in November. I think it's the 16th or 17th of November. So getting, just kind of getting out and showing people what these drones can do kind of really picks people's interest. And then once people start to fly and they see how fun they are, and then they kind of get hooked.
That's awesome. Thank you. It looks like we've gotten through our questions today, so I appreciate you coming and taking the time and giving us the video, Chris, and sharing your story and that of the kids. I think STEM is super important. Aviation is another one of those career fields where we're looking at a shortage of pilots and maintainers in the not too distant future. So having folks like you working with the kids to get them ready is super important, and we really appreciate it. So thank you very much for all the work you do. And thank you everybody else for attending. It's been a great week. We hope you learned something. I will be putting all of these webinars online. And everybody, actually really quick, if anybody else wants credit for this, for the safety team, just type credit and it'll pop up with your name and I can make sure you get your wings credit. And then again, these will be posted online. I will send everybody links with the full recordings, and that's it. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.